We're here again to take the sources, really pull them apart, and then, build that knowledge back up for you in a way that makes sense, something that actually sticks.
And today, well, it feels like more than just our usual deep dive. It's like we're mapping an earthquake in psychological theory.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting into Mark Baer's new book, Narcissistic Redeemer, bringing you back from collapse.
And the context here is just crucial. This isn't simply another take on trauma or recovery. You've got Professor Samvaknin writing the introduction.
Right. The samvaknin, malignant self-love. His work basically gave us the language for modern narcissism studies.
Precisely. So when someone like Vaknin puts his name on it, writes the intro, well, it signals we need to take a really close look. It demands almost a forensic analysis.
It really is the ultimate stamp of approval, isn't it? Intellectually, I mean. You have this giant in the field, someone who's spent decades charting the narcissist's internal world. And he throws his institutional weight. The Vaknin-Rangelovska Foundation is involved in publishing behind a book focusing on the survivor's map. That feels like a major shift.
It absolutely does. And Vaknin, he brings this unique perspective of PhD in physics, which gives him that structural systems thinking approach combined with years as a professor of psychology at CIAPS.
Okay, so what's the big deal in the intro? What's the claim that makes this potentially historic?
Well, this is where it gets, frankly, astonishing. Vaknin says, quite explicitly, that he can't recall a conceptual framework this comprehensive, this compelling, since the foundational work of, wait for it, Ronald Fairbairn or Otto Kernberg.
Wow, okay. Fairbairn in the 40s, Kernberg in the 70s. These are the architects of our understanding of ego structure, internal objects, personality disorders.
They're the bedrock. So, to put Baer's work, this mirrored psychic inversion theory, or MPIT, in that same category, Vaknin is saying this isn't just about describing symptoms. He believes Baer has mapped the fundamental architecture of the survivor's experience in a radically new way.
That really does set the bar sky high. But like you said, sometimes these breakthroughs come from necessity, right? From lived experience, not just the ivory tower.
Exactly, which is why we absolutely have to start with the source of that necessity. The preface of the book details this utterly annihilating collapse that forced Mark Baer to create this theory, this map.
Right, the preface. You said it's essential context. It grounds all this high-level theory in something raw, something real.
It really does. Baer talks about that time leading up to what he calls the final collapse. He knew something was profoundly wrong, structurally wrong, but the existing language just wasn't cutting it.
He was searching online, right?
Looking for answers.
Constantly. He mentions terms like attachment issues, power games, but realized they only scratched the surface. They describe behaviors, yeah, but not the underlying mechanics, not the feeling of psychic drowning he was experiencing. The existing models weren't built for the specific kind of devastation he felt. He needed a mirror for his internal reality. But all he found were these sort of fragmented descriptions from the outside looking in.
That's a great way to put it. And the thing that finally tipped him over the edge, the catalyst for the complete disintegration, wasn't just general dysfunction. It was a very specific, calculated moment of cruelty.
An anecdote he shares.
Yes, and it perfectly illustrates that shift. We often talk about the narcissist moving from needing admiration, what Vaknin calls narcissistic supply, to actively feeding on the victim's pain, which is sadistic supply.
Okay, tell us about that moment. It sounds like a turning point.
It happened after a really difficult cycle. Baer had been trying to set boundaries, then folding, trying to stabilize things, maybe get some kind of closure. He calls her, needing reassurance, needing to hear they were okay, still caught in that hope for the shared fantasy.
And her response?
Pure weaponized sadism. She says, if you'd called yesterday at 5 a.m., you'd have caught me enjoying myself. Bad luck, Marky.
Oof. Bad luck, Marky. The casual cruelty in that. It's not just, no, it's designed to make him visualize her pleasure at his expense.
Exactly. It forces him into that alternative reality where she's deriving enjoyment precisely because he's suffering, and frames his timing, his need, as his own failing bad luck. It hits right at the core of his worth.
And the fallout wasn't just heartbreak. It was systemic collapse.
Total collapse. Mental and physical. He describes it meticulously. 3 weeks of this terrifying push-pull, the hoovering and discarding then. 65 days straight of getting 2 hours of sleep or less. Broken sleep at that.
65 days. That's unimaginable.
And he says the pain wasn't like psychological distress. He felt it was cellular, systemic. He uses this line, the body becomes a ghost. The mind becomes a dungeon.
The body becomes a ghost. The mind becomes a dungeon. That nails the feeling of losing your footing in reality itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just losing someone, it's like the self fragments and the world warps. He talks about time distorting too, right?
Yeah, feeling minutes stretch out forever, hours becoming phantoms. This complete breakdown of psychic cohesion, this loss of the ability to make sense of reality, that's the state MPIT tries to map structurally.
And it's out of that absolute necessity that he gives so much credit to Vaknin.
Immense credit. In the dedication, Baer thanks Vaknin for the searing clarity, brutal honesty, and theoretical audacity that made the framework possible. He specifically names Vaknin's core ideas: shared fantasy, the 5 energies, cold empathy, object hunger, trauma-bonded collapse, saying they built a map where none existed.
So it's like Vaknin provided the sort of architectural blueprint of the narcissistic system itself.
Right.
And Baer then drew the detailed plans showing how that system gets installed and operates inside the survivor, especially during that collapse phase.
That's a perfect analogy. It's theory meeting lived experience to create something new. Baer is clear that MPIT uses Vaknin's core vocabulary terms like collapse, inversion, psychic decathexis, so it's rooted in that psychodynamic tradition. But the innovation is applying it laser-focused on the victim's internal structural response.
It's the application that's groundbreaking.
Exactly.
And for listeners who might be thinking, okay, this sounds incredibly complex, the book itself has a structure designed to help, right?
Oh, very deliberately so.
Hmm.
Baer clearly wanted this to be more than just theory. He wanted it to be a tool for healing. So it's in 2 parts that mirror each other.
How's that work?
Part 1 is the deep dive, the core theoretical and narrative framework. That's the dense stuff for clinicians, academics, anyone who wants the full theoretical scaffolding.
Okay.
But then part 2 is the layman's guide and survivor's navigation. It takes the same concepts chapter by chapter and explains them in really practical, accessible language. It guides you, the survivor, in mapping your own internal experience using the MPIT framework. It makes the theory usable.
All right, let's really dig into this comparison Vaknin makes. Fairbairn and Kernberg. It's such a massive claim. Why? What specific intellectual leap does MPIT make that puts it in that league?
Okay, the absolute core of it, the reason for the comparison, is a fundamental shift in perspective. Think about traditional psychodynamic theory, even Vaknin's early groundbreaking work on the narcissist. Where was the focus?
On the narcissist, right, on the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Understanding their origins, their internal world, why they are the way they are. Kernberg, Fairbairn, their maps were of the disordered personality.
Precisely. They focused on the etiology, the origins, and the internal psychodynamics of the mentally ill individual. We got brilliant maps of the perpetrator's fragmentation. But what was missing?
A map for the person caught in their orbit. What actually happens to the survivor's internal structure?
Exactly. MPIT flips the script. It zeroes in on the victim, as Vaknin puts it. It offers the first detailed, dynamic map of the survivor's internalization process, how they take the abuser in, and the devastating structural consequences of that. It doesn't just say you have CPTSD symptoms. It says your very sense of self, your psychic authorship has been hijacked, colonized, and literally inverted.
Okay, structural colonization instead of just trauma response. That feels like a significant reframing. Let's start tracing that lineage with Ronald Fairbairn. Object relations theory. How does MPIT build on his work?
Fairbairn's insights, developed during the war, were revolutionary. He argued the core human drive isn't pleasure, it's relationship. The infant's deepest fear isn't losing the parent's love, per se, but losing the connection itself, the object.
Right, and to preserve that connection, even to a bad parent, the child does something drastic internally.
Yes, the ego splits. It internalizes the frustrating, rejecting, or overwhelming aspects of the parent, the bad object, to manage the unbearable reality. It's a way to control the badness by taking it inside.
This is the moral defense, isn't it?
Correct. The logic is, if mom or dad is bad, I'm helpless and risk abandonment. But if I am the bad one, then maybe I can control it. Maybe I can be good enough someday to fix the relationship and earn their love. The child chooses guilt over annihilation. That's how we form these internal objects, these psychic blueprints of others.
So how does MPIT translate that mechanism, internalizing the bad object, to preserve attachment to the adult survivor of narcissistic abuse?
Yeah.
What gets internalized then?
This is key. MPIT argues the survivor internalizes the narcissist, yes, but not as a whole person. They internalize the narcissist's defining characteristic, their innate absence, their darkness, their void. Through the shared fantasy, the survivor becomes this this functional extension, an instrument, a figment in his fantasy, as Bear puts it, an internal object serving the narcissist's needs. But the crucial structural move MPIT maps is what happens during that intense merging, that libidinal connection. A specific part of the narcissist gets projected and lodged inside the survivor, the hidden bad object. This is the narcissist's own disavowed self-hatred, their own internal bad object, which the survivor then hosts and unknowingly directs against themselves.
So when the survivor beats themselves up internally, feels worthless, replays criticisms, MPIT says that's not just self-blame. It's the introjected bad object of the narcissist running its program inside the survivor's psyche, like an internalized executioner.
Exactly. It's the ultimate psychic parasite. And by mapping this, MPIT gives the survivor a way to finally externalize that internal torment. It wasn't you generating that self-hatred. It was the function of the introject, the alien installation.
Okay, that's Fairbird's contribution. Now, Otto Kernberg, he focused on the severe pathologies, right? Borderline narcissistic structures, the use of primitive defenses like splitting within the perpetrator.
Kernberg brilliantly mapped the internal world of the severely narcissistic individual. He showed how their grandiosity masks a deeply fragile ego, maintained only by constantly splitting off bad feelings and projecting them outward. He detailed the mechanisms of that pathological structure.
And MPIT uses that language of fragility and splitting.
It uses the concepts, yes, fragmentation, splitting, ego cohesion, but applies them rigorously to understand what happens to the survivor's ego structure during the collapse phase.
So if the narcissist's ego is inherently fragile due to developmental issues, MPIT looks at the survivor's ego fragmentation during CIPR collapse-induced psychotic regression as a direct result of the external assault.
Precisely. CIPR isn't seen as an inherent flaw in the survivor. It's the catastrophic temporary breakdown of their ego structure triggered by the narcissist's symbolic annihilation, the gaze collapse. MPIT maps the trajectory of that structural impact on the survivor using Kernberg's insights about ego fragility, but focusing on the recipient of the damage, the colonized territory, not the source of the pathology itself.
So, by weaving together Fairbairn's ideas about internalizing bad objects with Kernberg's map of ego fragility, and applying it all directly to the survivor's post-abuse internal state, Baer creates what Vaknin calls a cluster B theory of everything. That's still a staggering claim. How does Vaknin justify that?
Vaknin sees it as a theory of everything for this dynamic because it offers a complete causal chain. It explains the initial hook, shared fantasy, maps the precise mechanics of the psychic destruction the MPIT faces, and provides a structural pathway for recovery, reassembly. It connects all the dots.
It's the completeness of the model.
Yes. And Vaknin argues it's inherently curative for that reason. If you can understand the structure of the trap, you can begin to dismantle it. It moves the survivor away from thinking, what's wrong with me, to understanding, this is the predictable mechanical sequence of colonization that happened to me. It gives intellectual power back to the survivor.
Okay, before we map that devastating collapse sequence itself, we need to understand the engine driving it. MPIT rests heavily on Vaknin's framework, the idea that narcissists don't relate, they consume.
That's fundamental. They're described as autoerotic machines. Others aren't seen as separate individuals with their own needs and realities. Instead, people are used as functions, as extensions of the narcissist's self, primarily to regulate their own internal emptiness, that terrifying void.
The survivor is essentially a utility. Their value is purely functional.
Correct. And Baer uses Vaknin's 4 S's to detail exactly what functions the survivor is coerced into providing. These are the core needs the narcissist seeks to fulfill through others.
Let's go through them. The first S, sex.
Right away, you have to understand it's detached from intimacy, from real connection. For the narcissist, sex is instrumental. It's about performance their own. It's about control, confirming their power, their desirability.
The partner is just a prop.
Essentially, yes. A prop in their internal fantasy life. A mirror reflecting back their supposed sexual prowess. That's why the experience for the partner can often feel overwhelming or mechanical or just weirdly disconnected. The narcissist is performing for themselves, not truly engaging with the partner. The partner's pleasure is, optional, maybe even irrelevant.
So less a shared experience, more a solo performance with an audience of one who happens to be physically present. A tool for self-regulation through performance.
Exactly. Okay, the second S supply, this is the big one. The narcissist's psychological oxygen, their lifeblood, their emotional respiration, as Vaknin calls it.
And this is where that crucial distinction comes in, the one that drives the collapse.
Yes, you have to differentiate between narcissistic supply, NS, and sadistic supply,
And
SS.
this is the initial phase, right? The admiration, the validation.
Correct. NS is getting you to mirror their idealized self-image. It's praise, attention, reflecting their status, their brilliance, their charm. They need you to constantly affirm how wonderful they are, but that well often runs dry. Or the narcissist's needs shift,
And that's when they switch to needing sadistic supply.
which is the need to feed on the victim's negative emotions, their pain, their fear, their confusion, their desperation, their collapse. When your success or happiness no longer serves them, maybe you're becoming too independent, threatening their control, they need to engineer your failure or suffering to feel powerful again.
So the engine of devaluation and the ultimate collapse is this switch from needing your admiration, NS, to actively needing your agony.
And that switch is the catastrophic engine. It shatters the shared fantasy and is designed consciously or unconsciously to precipitate the victim's psychic breakdown.
Okay, the third S, services. The instrumentalization.
This is about reducing the partner to a tool for practical and emotional labor. Cleaning, cooking, organizing their life, managing their finances, but also, crucially, absorbing their rage, forgiving their transgressions, soothing their anxieties, constantly caretaking their fragile ego.
And they see this as their right, not a gift.
Absolutely. It's expected. Your labor, emotional and physical, is simply a function you provide to regulate their chaotic internal and external world. It's often completely invisible to them, taken for granted. Stop providing the service and your value plummets. There's no inherent worth seen in you, only in the function.
And the final S, safety. This sounds odd because narcissists often create chaos and seem terrified of real intimacy.
Their definition of safety is different. For the narcissist, safety means control over abandonment. They crave the reassurance of having someone there, but it's a very specific kind of closeness. Close enough to validate them and prove they aren't alone, but not so close that you might see the real emptiness, the shame, the mess inside.
So safety equals dominance.
Precisely. It's about controlling the terms of the relationship, especially the exits. They need to feel they're the ones in charge of proximity and distance. They often achieve this by creating chaos while demanding absolute loyalty. The moment you try to assert independence or threaten that control, they'll make you feel profoundly unsafe, often through calculated cruelty or betrayal to reestablish dominance.
It's a terrifyingly closed system. They use external people to manage their internal state via these four functions.
Well-
And underpinning all of this, the sources say, is a core psychodynamic issue. The maternal split.
Yes, this is seen as the foundational wound, the template. The idea is the narcissist carries this unresolved, split internal image of their primary caregiver, usually the mother. There's the idealized, perfect, all-giving mother they crave, and then there's the rejecting, engulfing bad mother they fear and hate.
And the survivor gets caught in the crossfire of this internal drama.
Completely. You're forced onto the stage of their internal theater. You're cast simultaneously as the idealized mother figure who must provide perfect, constant, unconditional support, and as the recipient of all the rage and punishment meant for the internalized bad mother figure the moment you show any imperfection or assert any need of your own. Your relationship was never truly about you. It was always about their desperate, doomed attempt to resolve this ancient internal conflict using you as a prop.
Okay, we understand the machine, the four S's, the underlying maternal split. Now let's map the actual structural damage MPIT describes. The theory reframes the abuse not just as trauma, but as a structural collapse of psychic authorship.
Right. And the survivor gets trapped in what Baer calls a recursive simulation of the narcissist's fantasy. It's like their mind is forced to run the narcissist's operating system.
Let's walk through the key phases MPIT identifies. It starts with the hook, the shared fantasy installation.
This phase involves two key mechanisms. First, coercive snapshotting. The narcissist quickly identifies an idealized, static role they need you to fill, the perfect partner, the savior, whatever fits their current script, and then freezes you in that role. Any part of you that doesn't fit the snapshot is ignored or punished.
And the survivor buys into this through misrecognition.
Exactly. You mistake the intensity of the narcissist's initial focus, that laser gaze, for genuine seeing, for recognition of your true, authentic self. But MPIT argues it's not recognition of you. It's recognition only of the pseudo-false self, the character the narcissist has written for you, the one that perfectly meets their needs. Your boundaries dissolve, and you essentially agree to become a host for their libidinal energy, their projections.
That intense beginning makes the withdrawal phase so much more potent. The first signs of trouble appear during hypocathexis and devaluation cycles. What is hypocathexis?
Think of cathexis as the investment of emotional energy. Hypo means less or under. So hypocathexis is the partial withdrawal of that intense libidinal investment. It's like the power flickers. You get the small jabs, the sudden cold shoulder, the unexplained withdrawal of affection, the beginning of that classic push-pull dynamic.
And the purpose of this oscillation?
It's designed to destabilize the survivor. Your self-confidence starts to fray as you desperately try to figure out what you did wrong to cause the withdrawal. You internalize it as your fault. I need to try harder, be better, figure out what they need, which is exactly the point. It makes you double down on trying to please them, which is the first step toward that structural inversion that MPIT describes.
It's that intermittent reinforcement. It
Yeah.
keeps you hooked, constantly trying to regain the good phase. But then comes the point of no return. Decathexis and gaze collapse.
Decathexis is the full, often abrupt, and final withdrawal of that libidinal investment. It's the symbolic execution of the shared fantasy. Bear puts it starkly, the mirror goes black.
The mirror goes black.
Wow. Yeah. Your identity, which had become so dependent on being reflected, validated, essentially authored by the narcissist's gaze, suddenly has no external reference point. That abrupt derecognition isn't just painful, it causes acute psychic destabilization. After potentially cycles of hoovering and discarding, this final withdrawal isn't just a breakup, it's experienced as a total collapse of the reality you inhabited.
And this catastrophic break leads directly into the most acute phase. CIPR, collapse-induced psychotic regression. Now, that term psychotic regression sounds pretty intense. How does MPIT justify using clinical language like that for what many see as a trauma response?
It's a really important clarification. MPIT uses the term carefully. It's not suggesting the survivor develops a chronic psychotic disorder. It's describing a temporary, profound failure of reality testing that is induced by the sudden, total demolition of the shared psychic structure they relied on.
So what does that look like? What are the phenomena?
During CIPR, the survivor can experience transient, psychotic-like symptoms. Things like severe temporal distortion time speeding up or slowing down, hours are phantom, seconds feeling endless, hallucinoid flashbacks reliving moments with terrifying vividness, a profound inability to synthesize information or experience, feeling utterly fragmented and unreal. It's the psyche temporarily breaking down under an unbearable structural load.
And it's within this state of breakdown that the ego fragments.
Yes. The internal pressure becomes too much. The ego splits into distinct, often competing parts as a survival mechanism. MPIT identifies key players. The mute child, holding the raw, unspeakable trauma, often silenced by shame or fear. The false protector, which tries to maintain a semblance of normal functioning for the outside world but feels hollow inside. The redeemer, the part still desperately clinging to the fantasy, trying to figure out how to win the narcissist back, running the old scripts. And the truth self, the authentic core, often buried in exile during the abuse.
So the survivor feels like they're going crazy because they literally are fragmented. There's an internal civil war happening.
A civil war inside a collapsing structure that is simultaneously turning itself inside out, which leads directly to the long-term trap MPIT describes, IMRA, or inverse mirrored reflexive apathy. This is the absolute core of the RMPI reciprocal mirrored psychic inversion process.
Okay, break down RMPI and IMRA. Inversed mirrored reflexive apathy.
RMPI describes the process where the survivor's constant attempts to merge with, understand, and accommodate the narcissist result in them reciprocally taking on or hosting the narcissist's internal dynamics. The inversion part means this hosted structure then gets turned inward.
So IMRA is the result of that inversion.
Exactly. IMRA is the state where the survivor starts running the dynamics of the narcissistic relationship internally, against themselves. The cold empathy the narcissist showed them, they turn it on themselves. The rejection, directed inward, the impossible standards, applied to the self. The apathy towards their own suffering, that becomes internalized too. They become their own internal narcissist, directing the abuse inward.
They're running the abuser's program on their own system.
Precisely. And this leads to the feeling of being trapped in the hall of mirrors and orbital collapse. The survivor feels stuck in this looping, self-sustaining architecture of inversion. Everywhere they look internally, they see distorted reflections generated by the hosted narcissistic structure. They keep orbiting the central void, the narcissist's original emptiness, unable to break free and reauthor their own reality because the very lens they're looking through is warped.
Which brings us to what must be the most painful realization in the whole theory. The symbolic inversion. It's not just that you lost yourself.
It's that you became the repository for what the narcissist couldn't tolerate in themselves. This is the real gut punch, the mic drop of MPIT. You don't become a narcissist, you become the vessel for the narcissist's discarded internal object, their own self-hatred, their psychic debris. You are unknowingly hosting and acting out the punishment the narcissist projected onto you because they couldn't face it themselves.
So the internal agony isn't proof of your own badness.
It's proof that an alien psychic structure is operating within you. Recognizing that is key.
Okay, so if the collapse is structural, MPIT argues the healing has to be structural too. It can't just be about managing emotions.
Exactly. Traditional approaches focusing solely on emotional regulation or changing behaviors, while helpful in some ways, are seen by MPIT as insufficient because they don't address the underlying architecture. The problem isn't just feeling bad, it's that the internal symbolic structure is broken and inverted.
So true recovery needs symbolic reintegration. What was the other term? Ethical revolt.
Yes, symbolic reintegration means actively working to mend those internal splits and reclaim psychic space. Ethical revolt is the conscious, deliberate decision to stop running the narcissist script, both internally in how you talk to yourself and externally in how you engage with the world. It's refusing to perform the role assigned to you in their drama any longer.
Which means you have to do that internal reassembly work, consciously identifying and understanding those fragmented parts that emerge during RMPI. The mute child, false protector, redeemer.
And the introject enforcer, that's a key one. That's the internalized voice of the narcissist, the one that delivers the criticisms, the judgments, the "you're worthless, you failed" messages.
So reassembly isn't about getting rid of these parts.
No, it's about understanding their function, validating the experience they hold, especially the mute child, and refusing to let them drive the bus. The interject enforcer needs to be recognized as alien, as not your voice, and actively challenged. The false protector needs to be gently retired as the truth self gains strength. The redeemer needs to be understood as a part desperately trying to survive, but ultimately chasing a ghost. The goal is integration, getting all the parts to sit at the same table, as Bear suggests, under the leadership of the authentic self, not warring for control.
That sounds like incredibly deep, specialized work, moving from being sort of psychically occupied territory to becoming the architect of your own internal world again.
It is, and the ultimate aim of rebuilding that internal structure is narrative reclamation, because as we discussed, the abuse involved profound narrative theft.
Right, Vaknin's line, the narcissist scripts you. You are the villain of the story. Your own lived experience gets twisted, reframed. Your intentions, kindness, loyalty, effort get turned into evidence of your flaws or manipulations in their narrative.
You were framed. Your story was stolen and rewritten to serve their reality. So the healing requires reclaiming the pen.
Which MPIT calls achieving vertical authorship.
Yeah.
Can you explain that distinction again? Horizontal versus vertical.
Think spatially. Horizontal authorship is living your life looking outwards, constantly scanning the horizon for validation, for approval, for mirroring. What do they think of me? Am I doing it right according to them? Your sense of self is dependent on external feedback.
Okay.
Vertical authorship shifts the axis 90 degrees. It's about connecting downwards into your own core, your own felt sense of truth and integrity. It's reclaiming the authority to define your own experience, your own reality, independent of anyone else's gaze or judgment. You stop asking, am I okay by them, and start declaring, this is my truth. This is who I am. It's a shift from seeking external approval to inhabiting internal sovereignty.
A fundamental shift in orientation. And the final piece of this recovery, the thing that likely keeps people trapped in that inverted state, is dealing with the crushing self-blame.
Absolutely. And this is where MPIT offers a final, powerful reframe. The sheer depth of the survivor's suffering, the guilt, the remorse, the confusion, the desperate longing for resolution, the empathy they still feel, all of that is actually proof that they are not the narcissist.
How so?
Because those feelings demonstrate a functioning, empathetic human psyche grappling with something alien and damaging. A true narcissist wouldn't be tormented by these things in the same way. The more intense the suffering under the internal logic of narcissism, the clearer the evidence that this logic is foreign, that it's being hosted, not originated.
So the suffering itself becomes evidence of your non-narcissism.
Exactly. It proves you are the host, struggling against the parasite. As Bear puts it, the ultimate realization is you are its host, not its origin. And that realization is the key to the symbolic exorcism, to finally separating yourself from the internalized abuser.
Wow. Okay, stepping back. This deep dive into Narcissistic Redeemer and MPIT, it really clarifies why Vaknin would make such a bold comparison to Kernberg and Fairbairn. It provides this incredibly detailed map, the vocabulary, to understand narcissistic abuse, not just as emotional pain, but as a fundamental structural colonization of the psyche.
It really does. By taking those high-level concepts, ego structure, internal objects, and grounding them directly in the survivor's lived, often terrifying internal experience, Baer bridges a huge gap. It connects the abstract clinical world with the concrete reality of collapse.
And having the language, the ability to name these mechanisms, hypocathexis, CIPR, RMPI, the interject enforcer, that itself must be incredibly empowering, curative, as Vaknin says.
It shifts everything. It stops you from thinking I'm broken or I'm crazy and allows you to see this is predictable structural breakdown caused by an external force, and structures can be understood and rebuilt. It turns confusion into clarity. It really is, as Vaknin notes, both a potential lifeline and, for those interested in the theory, an intellectual delight.
And the strength MPIT highlights isn't just getting out. It's surviving that symbolic death, that gaze collapse, and then undertaking the immense work of reclaiming your internal reality, your authorship.
That moment of recovery, when the survivor stops performing the script, stops simulating that false self, and starts speaking their own truth. Not necessarily for anyone else, but just because it is their truth. That feels like the core of it.
Which leaves us, and you listening, was a really potent question to consider, doesn't it? When you listen closely to your own internal dialogue, that chatter in your head, which voice is running the show?
Is it the voice guiding you towards that vertical authorship, towards your own authentic truth? Or is it the echo, maybe faint, maybe loud, of that interject enforcer, still running the old discarded script? Just being able to ask that question, to begin to differentiate those voices. Well, that's the first real act of reclaiming your sovereignty.